Alright, let's continue. Now that the head is mostly done, we can focus on the body. The first step I like to do is scale everything to match her correct proportions. Since we are aiming for 1/7 scale collectible and her canonical height is 160 centimeters, the final print will be somewhere around 22 and 26 centimeters tall. Knowing this gives us a solid baseline for how the body proportions and volumes should be distributed. But first, we need to paint the hands and feet. I do this primarily to speed up the workflow. If you've seen my past videos, you know what it's like to sculpt them completely from scratch. However, when you are working under a tight deadline to produce models, it's just smarter to start with base parts that are already in an advanced stage of detailing. But don't get me wrong, inserting a pre-detailed mesh doesn't mean we won't be working on those areas later. I'm still testing out a few workflows when using these pre-made parts. For instance, sometimes I intentionally inflate the fingers if I know I don't need to work on them separately. The reason is, when we bridge the topology to merge the hands and feet to the limbs, vertices that are too close together can accidentally snap and weld to hidden areas. It happened to me a dozen of times, so keep that in mind. If you want to ensure nothing merges accidentally during this bridging stage, take a close look at the model and physically separate any geometry that might conflict when using the modeler. Once the height's set, I prefer to start block out the torso because it gives us a much better understanding of the overall volume the character will need. At this stage, I try to keep the topology as low as possible. It's easy to get caught up wanting more detail and spending hours on something that will completely distort or lose its shape once we pose the character. Of course, there are times I will add a subdivision level to work into it, but even then, I force myself to focus on the low poly form, at least until the pose is locked in. After that, my focus shifts entirely to higher frequency detailing without worrying about the lower subdivision. When sculpting the torso, I'm also constantly checking my reference and translating those shapes to the model. I start with landmarks where the skeletal structure should be visible, map out the musculature, and consider how the skin compresses. Even when I know a specific muscle group by heart, I still look at the reference sheets and existing figures of the character to see how other artists portrayed them and figure out how to apply those design choices to our model. When I reach the shoulders, I usually have two options. I can stop there and move to the legs, or I can keep moving down the arm. This time I choose the arm since her anatomy here is a bit more straightforward. It's the exact same process as the torso, constantly looking at the reference, pulling out the major forms, and then defining the proper placement for the muscle. Here we follow the same process of analyzing the reference and applying to the mesh, but with legs we run into a common visual issue. Because they are so close together, one leg is almost always blocking your view of the other. To fix this, I focus entirely on sculpting just one leg, marking the landmarks and defining the muscle volume. Once the side looks good, we can mask the leg we just worked on, invert the mask, and use Smart Resin to transfer all those details over to the unmasked leg. You might ask, why do we need to mask it first? If you don't mask the finished leg, Smart Resim will just average out the geometry between the sculpted leg and the completely blank leg, ruining your work. By masking the finished leg, you protect it from being modified, forcing the ZBrush to mirror its exact details over to the other side. When it comes to the hand and feet, we can do a little bit of a preliminary sculpting, but don't go too far. We don't yet know exactly how they will deform the final pose, so it's best to keep your works strictly confined to what can be done symmetrically. That way, you save yourself from having to fix complex, asymmetrical sculpts later on. And that's it. The model now has a solid foundation of detail that will make our lives much easier during the posing stage, and the proportions are like right on track. In the next video, we'll finally pose the character and begin adding the dynamic details like skin impression, micro folds, and wrinkle. Thank you so much for sticking around until the end. If you learned something new today, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.